BBC News with Sue Montgomery. President Putin has escalated his rhetoric against international sanctions, saying these are tantamount to a declaration of war. Mr. Putin warned the West of a wider war if a no-fly zone was set up over Ukraine. But as our correspondent Danny Eberhard now reports, Mr. Putin said he was satisfied with how the campaign was playing out.
He insisted all was going to plan. When asked, Mr. Putin said Russia had not deployed conscripted troops in Ukraine. That's despite reports to the contrary. He also rejected suggestions he'd introduce a state of emergency or martial law in Russia. And he issued a warning to any third party that tried to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Ukraine has been imploring NATO to impose such a no-fly zone, something the Western alliance has rejected, fearing it could spark a much wider war.
Mr. Putin on Saturday had his first face-to-face meeting with a foreign leader since ordering his force to invade Ukraine, holding 3 hours of talks with the Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who's offered to mediate in the crisis. Mr. Bennett has also been speaking to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky by phone. Russian forces have continued their offensive against Ukrainian towns and cities, with heavy bombardment reported northwest of Kiev. A steady stream of people have been fleeing the town of Irpin on foot, taking only what they can carry. Some talked of constant shelling by the Russian military as it tries to break through and advance on Kiev. But there remain questions about the performance of the Russian military. Here's our security correspondent, Frank Gardner.
Much of Russia's military has so far underperformed in Ukraine. Prior to the invasion, it was assumed that the army had undergone a radical rehaul, reorganizing itself into so-called battalion tactical groups. But it hasn't worked out like that. Russian commanders, especially in the north, have manifestly failed to make full use of this modern kind of warfare, and they appear to have underestimated the strength of Ukrainian resistance, losing large numbers of men and equipment. So now, as grimly predicted, the gloves have come off. Russian military tactics have reverted to a crude but tried and tested doctrine. Encircle a city, pummel it with airstrikes, tank and artillery fire, and break the morale of both its defenders and those simply trying to survive.
President Zelensky has told members of the US Congress that Ukraine desperately needs Russian-made fighter jets, which its pilots know how to fly. In a video address, he also repeated his urgent wish for a no-fly zone for Russian forces, something NATO has rejected. The Russian Foreign Ministry has called on EU and NATO countries to stop, in its words, pumping weapons into Ukraine. BBC News. The payment giants Visa and MasterCard are suspending their services in Russia because of its invasion of Ukraine. MasterCard said it will no longer support cards issued by Russian banks, and MasterCards issued outside the country will not work at Russian merchants or ATMs. Visa says it will cease all transactions in Russia in the coming days. Meanwhile, more international companies, including the German sportswear company Puma and the Spanish fashion retailer Inditex, are temporarily closing hundreds of shops in Russia. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been meeting Ukrainian refugees in a warehouse set aside for their shelter in Kochova in Poland. About 3,000 people, mainly women and children, are resting there. A BBC correspondent says they've spent days getting to the crossing, some carrying pets which peek out from inside children's jackets. Tens of thousands more are waiting to cross the borders. Our correspondent Charlotte Gallagher is in Lviv.
As we walked up to the train station, and actually there's a bus station next to it, and there's buses there taking people out of Ukraine and into Poland, it's just a sea of people. There are so many people queuing up or sometimes just sitting down. I saw people with their head in their hands, obviously not knowing what they're going to do next. The Red Cross are there giving out cups of tea and soup, and different religious groups as well. And then you walk into the train station, and it's just a mass of people queuing up, trying to get the next train.
In other news, the military government in Mali has denied allegations that the army carried out summary executions of civilians earlier this month. It comes after the UN peacekeeping mission decided to investigate reports of a mass killing in the central town of Jabali. BBC News.